So the program of this presentation today, we will, after talking a little bit about thiolic compounds, we are going to talk about how we can extract these aromatic compounds that are under precursor form in the cells of the skin of the grapes. And then once we extract them, we are going to have to protect them. These compounds as precursor form are not as sensitive as aromatic form, but still they are sensitive to oxidation. So we do have to protect them from oxidation. We will see how we can increase the content of these thiolic precursors and really boost the production of these aromas during fermentation. We will also see how we can express the thiols, aromatic thiols, because so far we were talking about precursors. Aromatic thiols are how basically we can release the precursors from their sugar and make them on a volatile form that we smell during fermentation, during aging. And then the last point will be how can we preserve these aromas once we extract them, protected them, express them? How do we preserve them in the wine until we bottle? So until the consumer opens the bottle. Okay. So a pretty complete presentation on the full winemaking process. I put some images there just as a reminder that thiols smell mostly like passion fruit, grapefruit, citrus peel, lemon peel, any citrus, gooseberry, but also lately, and you will see we found many thiols in red wine that can smell like blackcurrant, red currant, and basically berries in general. So thiolic compounds are always associated with these fresh aromas of citrus, tropical, blackcurrant, red berries. So the main thiolic compounds we are talking about in grape and in wine, there is many, it's a big family, but really when we look at the extraction, the concentration of these compounds, we are really talking about two big compounds. I put three here, but one, we talk about thiols, but it's actually an acetate, you will see. So there is two main thiolic compounds we have. They depends on many points. So it is a varietal aroma, so it comes from the grape. So the variety is going to have a big impact on the composition of the grapes, of course. So the juice, so the wine, which means the variety will have a strong impact on the content on thiolic compounds, but also how the terroir, the climate, and how we take care of the vineyards. Okay, all the vineyard practices. So, but if we talk varieties in white wine, which we know thiolic compounds in white wine are mostly Sauvignon Blanc, Vermentino, Chardonnay, Colombard, Muscat. There is some in Riesling, there is some in Chenin Blanc. There is many varieties that are rich in thiolic compounds, as you can see here. On red grapes, so we know they are present on red grapes because we have a lot of thiolic compounds in rosé, which are coming from red grapes. So we already know red grapes have thiolic compounds, and lately we found there is more studies on thiols and red wine, and we found very high concentration of thiolic compounds on red wine too. So the richest varieties are Grenache, Syrah, Merlot, Pinotage, Mourvèdre, Cabernet Sauvignon, Gamay, Pinot Noir are varieties that are very rich in thiolic compounds. We are talking about two thiolic compounds. The first one is the 4-MMP, 4-mercaptomethylpentanetone. So we'll call it 4-MMP. It smells like boxwood. It could also smell at a higher concentration as cat urine. And in red wine, it's participating to the black currant and really fresh aromas in fresh red berries, red fruit in the wine. The threshold of this compound is 0.8 nanogram per liter, so very low. So it means that really a mini drop of this compound, imagine a mini drop in a big swimming pool, will already make the swimming pool smell like it. So we are talking about minor concentration. The second thiol we will talk about is a 3-mercaptohexanol or 3-MH. The 3-MH is smelling very grapefruit, but citrus in general, but on the grapefruit side. And in red wine, it's also associated with currants, black currant, red currant. This compound has a higher threshold of 60 nanogram per liter, which means we need more concentration to actually smell it. Still is very low. The last compound I will be talking about during the presentation is actually the acetate of the 3-MH. So once the 3-MH is formed, the yeast can transform it in an acetate as the yeast produce esters and acetates. And we are talking here about the 3-mercaptohexylacetate or acetate 3-MH. It smells very similar to the 3-MH. There is a lot of citrus and tropical fruits here, but it's a little bit riper. The note of the acetate 3-MH is more on the passion fruit, guava, riper grapefruit, oranges, this type of aromas. The threshold is much lower. So once the yeast transforms the 3-MH in acetate 3-MH with the same molecule being transformed, one molecule being transformed, we increase a lot the intensity of the aroma and the perception of it because the threshold is only 4 nanogram per liter. Okay, so this will be the two thiols and acetate that we will talk about today that are really the main one that we find in grapes, also in wine. So I told you a little bit about thiols in red grapes. It's a little bit newer topic because we used to talk a lot about thiols in white wine, and now we talk a lot about thiols in rosé and on red wine. So this is a study done in Australia, where we're looking at different concentration of thiolic compounds in red wine. And as you can see, all these varieties that you see here have a very high concentration of thiolic compound. Just to remind you here, when we are looking at the 3-MH, the threshold is 60 nanogram per liter. And on the graph that you can see here, we are starting at 100 here. Okay, so we go very high. So it's highly perceived in terms of aroma in the wine. So high concentration in red wines, and this study has been followed by the sensorial study where they spike the wines with 3-MH and acetate 3-MH, and people found, after triangular, people found significant differences between the wines. The wine that were spiked with thiols were having a higher intensity of red fruit, black currant, red currant, and way more fresher aromatic profile of the wine. So they were actually always preferred. So it is a very interesting thing that we didn't focus on before. So that's really, that's why I wanted to do this webinar and really talk about it today. So now I told you we are talking precursors. So basically these thiolic compounds in the grapes are under precursor form. Precursor means non-volatile, non-aromatic. They are attached to a sugar. Okay, so we have mostly two types of precursors, the cysteine derivate and the glutathione derivate. They are both attached to a sugar, which is here, and then you see the cysteine that is here and the glutathione is here. Okay, this is for the 3-MH and the 4-MMP, same concept. We need to express this thiol because as a precursor form, they are kind of useless. They are not very sensitive to oxidation, but we don't perceive them. So there is no point to have them in the final wine. To express them, the main mechanism works via enzymatic activity. The enzymatic activity will cut the thiol from its sugar, as you can see, and it is a carbon sulfur lyase activity that is needed to release volatile thiol. So we will release, in this case, with this enzymatic activity, we'll release some 3-MH and some 4-MMP. Then, during the action of fermentation of the yeast, we will have the transformation of 3-MH into acetate 3-MH. We still maintain citrus notes, but a riper citrus note with tropical note as well. Okay, so main mechanism is via enzymatic activity, which is mostly an enzymatic activity from the yeast, but not only, and we are going to talk about this. The second, there is another mechanism that is minor in the wine, but it happens, so I thought we should talk about it. It's not via enzymatic activities, but it's actually the biogenesis of the 3-MH via glutathione and hexenal. Hexenal is a molecule that is present in grapes, same thing, it's present in the skin of the berries, and it is a molecule that is responsible of the green character, smelling like cut grass. It's really the cut grass molecule. So we have it naturally in the grapes. The other thing is we can also have it produced with the oxidation of lipids. So when the hexenal is in contact with a glutathione, as you can see these two molecules on the graph here, we have a chain of reaction that can happen that will then produce a cysteine derivates MH, 3-MH. So we have a Thiols precursor here, okay, that then we can transform in 3-MH via an enzymatic activity, as we saw before. So to be in this condition is a little bit tricky. It can happen, but it's not the main concept and mechanism that happens, mostly because we need glutathione to be here and we need hexenal to be here. So glutathione is a strong natural antioxidant. So we want to be in a condition that there is no oxidation to maintain our glutathione, but hexenal is produced via the oxidation of lipids. So it means we need to have oxidation happening. So it's a bit tricky. We need to be on a low sulfur usage with the addition of glutathione to make sure we can have this transformation. It is interesting to think about it when we are in a green character moment. So when there is a natural hexenal present in the skin of the berries, and then in this case we can transform a green character into a tropical aromas, and it becomes very interesting. Okay, so to keep in mind that this process exists too, but really the main one to have thiolic compound expressed is via enzymatic activity. So before I go through the winemaking process, I wanted to talk very quickly about the vineyard, because that's all everything starts all the time. But when we talk about varietal aromas, of course, it starts with the variety, the terroir, but also the vineyard practices. And there is some very good studies on thiolic compounds and vineyard practices. So the first one that I want to tell you is like a low to moderate hydric stress will help having more concentration of thiolic precursors in the berries. Nitrogen fertilization will help thiolic precursors formation in the berries. Foliar nitrogen spray, that's a huge impact. Actually, we see very good result on red and on white varieties to increase thiolic compounds production. The heat and the sun exposure will decrease the concentration of thiols in the berries. And then the picking decision. Picking decision, of course, depending the maturation, we all know this. What's interesting is there is a study that shows that depending the time of the day we are picking the grapes, we have a difference in concentration. So this is a study done in Japan where you see we are following the precursors of the 3-MH during a full day, during a 24-hour period. And basically what's interesting is that the concentration is reduced or lowering of, in this case, 40% when we are picking between 11 and 5 p.m., 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And this is mostly due to the fact that there is sun and heat at this period. So very interesting to consider when to pick to really focus on the amount of thiolic precursor, but not only, it's also impact other varietal aromas and composition of the grapes too, in fact. So after in fact, before, but after the study, really the picking decision in Provence, Rosé, got very confirmed that we needed to pick during the night. That's really when the grapes have the most potential. Okay, so enough about vineyard. Let's talk about winemaking process, which is really the goal of today. And we have different steps to talk about. So the first step is going to be to extract the thiolic precursors from the grapes. You see on your screen where the repartition of the thiolic precursors from the flesh and the skin. And you can see that there is way more precursors in the skin cells of the berries. So we need to go on extraction. What is in the flesh will be extracted very easily. What we need to focus on is really the skin. So for this, we can do skin contact maceration, but with maceration comes also oxidation and come also extraction of some phenolic compounds that we don't necessarily want all the time. On red wine, though, maceration and skin contact are a great option. Temperature, usually the sweet spot is about 60 Fahrenheit, 58, 62, where you don't have too much oxidation, but it's hot enough to extract. So that's where there is a good a good temperature range here. Enzyme can participate very strongly in the extraction of compounds from the skin, especially aromatic compounds. So here you see results done with the enzyme crush, which is our extraction enzyme. It's our pectinase specifically designed for extracting compounds from the skin. And you see that we are talking in aromatic index because each compound have different threshold. So here we are looking at basically the concentration of the thiol divided by the perception threshold. So the aromatic index of 1 will be that it's 1 unit of perception. So when you are at 2, it means that you smell it very strongly. Okay, so the control in thought, you can see the difference between the wine without enzyme and the one where we use enzyme on the grapes. We have basically more than double the concentration of thiolic compounds, which means we more than double the aromatic expression of the wine. Pressing is another way to extract from the skin. As you can see in this graph here, we see that there is more concentration of 3-MH derivate, precursor, cysteine derivate in the press fraction than the free run. But the press fraction have a lot of phenolic compounds and turbidity. So it's actually, this is showing that it's very interesting to keep the press fraction, but maybe we want to separate them because we need to treat them in a different way. Still, they are interesting fraction to keep because of their aromatic potential. And then there is also another method that is the lees tabulation at low temperature. So these compounds are highly present in solids, so they are in the lees. So if we keep the clean lees and we can stabulate them, or we can just leave these lees macerate at low temperature for a few days, we are going to have more of this thiolic precursor extracted from the lees or from the solid to the juice at this stage. Be careful with having no fermentation starting, so you need to be at low temperature. And to avoid to put too much sulfur, we usually recommend to use BioNature, which is our bioprotection, to not have a fermentation starting. Okay, I'm happy to talk more about lees tabulation with you later in the Q&A. The second point, once we extracted them, we need to protect our thiolic precursors, but we also need to protect our glutathione, which is also a precursor of thiol when it's bonded to hexanal and when it is bonded to a thiol. Glutathione is our natural antioxidant, so if we preserve it, we will have way better potential of antioxidant resistance of the wine later down the road. One of the big steps of consumption of the glutathione is the pressing. Here I'm talking mostly whites and rosé. So Bouquervassin developed a press that is fully 100% inert. It is a closed system, so the press is attached to a nitrogen bag and the press pan is fully closed. So there is no oxygen coming in. As you can see the picture, there is a bag there, and basically every time we are inflating the membrane, we are using, we inflate the membrane. When we deflate the membrane, instead of being filled with oxygen, we are filling this space with nitrogen. So this bag of nitrogen is the lungs of the press, and you can see the press breathing through it to really be fully inert. The result of using a fully inert press are actually pretty very impressive, as you will see. But the first one is, since I'm talking about glutathione, is to preserve the glutathione. Here we are talking about a trial with the same press, just one time we plugged it to the nitrogen bag, one time we didn't. And the classic press, as you can see, really quickly we lose all our glutathione. It's fully consumed. It's the red line here. While the inert press, the Inertis press, is actually maintaining a high content of glutathione. As a result, in color, we can see it's very impressive. This is hard press, end of the press cycle. Same trial, you can see that you're probably used to this brown color, which is very common at the end of the press cycle to have juice that is brown. When we use inert press or the Inertis, fully enclosed system, we are fully green. And the berry, the mark, the pomace at the end of the press that you are emptying is green too. So no oxidation at all. In terms of result, here is trial from the Rosé Center done in 2008, where we're comparing, actually published in 2008, but done in 2006 and 2007, where every time we pressed with the inert press, the final wine was richer in 3 mH. Okay, so more thiolic compounds. And in terms of tasting, the wine was always with more orange, lemon, grapefruit, and fresher aromas, with less cooked caramel and roses, heavier note. So very, very strong result when we inert pressing step. Okay, the next step is to preserve or protect your grape potential. So I told you precursors are less oxidable than thiolic compounds, but they are still oxidable. So we realize that if we do a fining in whites and rosés that allow us to remove the unstable phenolics that are precursors of oxidation, we have way greater results in the final wine in terms of aromatic, because we are closer to oxidative stability. We are removing these unstable phenolics that are gonna oxidize our thiolic compounds, and by doing it proactively in must or during fermentation, we are having way better results in the final wine. Which fining agent we want to use in this case? We want to use a protein-based fining agent or a PVPP that will remove phenolic compounds. We here are proposing vegan allergen-free fining agents, because that's the trend, and that's actually what works very good. So we have a polymix nature that is yeast derivate PVPP bentonite, green fine must that is a pure pea protein, and the green fine express more for the press fraction, a little bit stronger, that is pea protein and PVPP base fining agent. As a result, in final wine, you can see here we are looking at the thiolic concentration. The wine that we fine with green fine must during fermentation is actually showing some 4 mmP that the control doesn't have anymore, way more 3 mH, actually double than the control, and a huge amount of acetate 3 mH2, which means we preserve the 3 mH for the yeast to transform it. So day and night in terms of wines, just because we did a fining. Color wise, you can see it here too. That's a free run juice. We are looking where we did the treatment, and we are looking at the color. You see you actually don't see what is what. The control is here, and the green fine must is here. Okay, so very interesting step to think about and to do to preserve thiolic compounds. Next step, we can increase the thiolic compounds level. So we can actually give to the yeast more precursors. As we know that we can isolate this precursor from yeast. So there is nutrients that are in activated yeast that are rich in sulfur peptides. Our optithiol is a nutrient that is extremely rich in cysteine derivatives, peptides. So we are giving to the yeast a lot of cysteine, of precursors of 3-MH and 4-MMP. This way, we are increasing the potential of our juice and so our wine. We use optithiol at inoculation from 15 to 30 grams per hectoliter. And this optithiol is a nutrient purely for aromatic purpose and antioxidant, as there is glutathione in it, but not as a nutritive purpose. So you see, it's very simple. When we use a higher dosage, we have a higher impact. But here you can look at the concentration. Again, we are looking at the aromatic index here. The control has way less thiolic compounds than the optithiol at 15 grams per hectoliter, and even less than the optithiol at 30 grams per hectoliter. It's very linear. The more you put, the more you get. When we look at it 9 months after fermentation, we still have the same difference. So these compounds are stable. It's not only during fermentation. It is actually creating a wine that has more aromas. And for the one that could be worried about adding sulfur peptides in juice and reduction, actually here, I'm showing you that there is less reduction when we use optithiol. The control is the first line that you see here. And here we are having the optithiol. There is less of sulfur aromas. Okay. So optithiol is a great tool to increase the thiolic compounds in white, in red, and in rosé. Okay, all the varieties can be a good candidate for this nutrient. Now that we extracted them, boost the amount, the level of thiolic precursors, we have to express these precursors. We have to make this all potential, as you can see, like this big box of balloon that is build up potential, free and volatile, so we can all smell it and enjoy it. How do we do this during fermentation? We can improve it with higher turbidity. That's to have even more thiolic compounds, thiolic precursors, because they are attached to solids. The temperature, if we ferment higher temperature, 62, 68, we are having a better activity of the yeast, the enzymatic activity of the yeast, which will improve the release and expression of this thiolic compound. Choose a yeast that is having a high carbon sulfur lyase activity, so we improve our conversion rate. In our portfolio, the Excellence FTH, but also the Excellence TXL are two great yeasts to produce thiols. Focus on yeast nutrition. We know that the yeast will produce more thiols when, of course, we give her glutathione, as you saw in the previous slides, but also if we focus on organic nitrogen, that is way more healthy for the yeast than DAP. So we are having better results when we focus on organic nitrogen. And the last point to help the yeast expressing more thiolic compounds is the yeast rehydration. Using a yeast rehydrator or yeast protector will help the yeast to be in perfect condition and optimize her metabolism, which will help her produce more thiolic compounds, which in reality, she doesn't need to do this. So the yeast will do thiols, will produce thiols as a side mechanism, but it's not necessarily needed for her to survive. So she needs to be in very good condition to do it, basically, because it's not her survival metabolism. So I told you about the rehydration. I just want to focus a little bit and show you results with our Enostim. Enostim is a yeast protector. It really promotes healthy development of the yeast. We are bringing vitamin, mineral, sterol, ergosterol, and saturated fatty acids, everything the yeast needs to have a very solid and resistant membrane and to be not stressed. No nitrogen here, so it's really focusing on protection of the yeast. As a result of using an ostim, we have way less of sulfur compounds. That's because the yeast is not stressed and doesn't have to produce them. And she is actually comfortable and more resistant to outside aggressions. We are having less VA on the final wine. That's also the same reason, less stress. And then we are having more thiolic compounds produced. Again, we are looking at the aromatic index here, and you can see the control versus an ostim. We managed to have double of the perception of the aromas, so double of the concentration of our thiolic compounds, mostly because we put the yeast in a very comfortable environment and resistant. So another way to express thiolic compounds is still with enzymatic activity, because we saw previously that's the only way, that's the main way. So the yeast has this enzymatic activity, but we can also use enzymes. So this is a little bit newer concept because we discovered this a little like not so long ago, but we developed a product called enzyme Thiols, which is a pectinase with beta-lyase and beta-glucosidase activity. Today, we are talking about beta-lyase because we're talking about thiolic compounds. There is other varietal aromas, such as terpenes, norisoprenoids, that are also under precursor form. And in this case, you need a beta-glucosidase activity to release this and express these aromatic compounds. Norisoprenoid terpenes are very floral and spicy. They smell like roses, violet, cherry, black pepper, cinnamon, all these type of aromas that are also very strong participants to the aromatic profile of the wine. Okay, so the enzyme thiol is really focusing on the beta-lyase, but can also release some terpenes and norisoprenoid. So a very good enzyme to use when you want to increase the aromatic intensity of the wine and you want to increase the wine freshness. There is few ways to use it. Or you use it during fermentation. And in this case, we are gonna do a parallel job than the yeast. We are gonna release precursors of 4-MMP and precursors of 3-MH. So we are giving to the yeast more 3-MH to transform in acetate 3-MH2. So we are having an increase on 4-MMP, 3-MH, and acetate 3-MH. When we are using it during aging, we are not giving to the yeast precursors anymore. So there is no impact on the acetate 3-MH, but we are only releasing the precursors that the yeast didn't do. And in fact, even the best yeast in all the best circumstances and conditions will not release all the thiolic precursor. We are actually leaving a good 40 to 60% of the thiolic precursor not expressed after fermentation. So aging is an option, but really often we use it pre-bottling. And the strategy here is to say, okay, I release what I can during fermentation, and then whatever I didn't release, I'm gonna keep them during aging in a precursor form as they are less sensitive to oxidation. And I'm gonna give a little boost of aromatic freshness pre-bottling. This enzyme needs about a month of contact, and you can use it in final wine, 4 to 6 milliliters per hectoliter. It's a very impressive result. Lately, we are doing it in red wine with successful results. So please ask a sample. We are happy to help you setting up trials. You can try it in your bottle before you put it in your tank. It's very low dosage, as you can see, so we don't need to deactivate the enzyme. We don't need to filter it. You just add it to your wine. That's pretty much it. I want to show you some results anyway that we did in wineries at 5 milligrams per hectoliter. So when we do it in a rosé wine, you see the thiol is the pink line, the control is blue. We're increasing the freshness, the red berry and the tropical aromas, but also the length of the wine. So more aromas, longer in the palate with the overall quality. In white wine, the enzyme thiol is a green line here. Pretty much the same profile. Here we are having more impact on the citrus and tropical fruit. Because the wine was having more precursors of citrus tropical fruit. And also we, as a reminder, in red wine, and so rosé, we are having more impact on the berries type of aromas than the citrus. And on red wine here, we actually saw that we are increasing the fresh fruit perception and decreasing the ripe fruit perception. So that makes it a very interesting tool when we are in this condition of overripe aromas and we want to increase freshness. We also increase cleanliness of the wine. Is just brighter, fresher, cleaner. You don't see, but here basically we're looking at the freshness of the wine. Volume, sorry. So the next step and the last step, once we extract our phenolic compound, boost the extract our thiolic precursor compound, boost our level of thiolic precursor compounds, express them during fermentation, express them during aging or pre-bottling, we have to protect and preserve these aromas. We can, of course, use sulfur to protect them from oxidation, but as there is a trend of low sulfur wine, I choose to go on a route that is an alternative to sulfur and works as good. So it's a yeast derivative that is also rich in sulfur peptides. So kind of the same approach and the optithiol, but very different composition, where here we are having a high concentration of glutathione. Basically, more than half of the sulfur peptides in the product are glutathione. Okay, so very strong antioxidant protection here. We use it towards the end of the fermentation, and it's going to naturally increase the antioxidant resistance of the wine and elongate the wine shelf life. As you can see in this graph here, we are looking first at, we are comparing the control with the addition of Aroma Protect, and we are looking at 3 months after what happened in the thiolic compound. Here, there is no 4-MMP, so we only look at the 3-MH and the acetate 3-MH. And as you can see, during 3 months of aging, basically our Aroma Protect maintain, preserve most of the 3-MH and most of the acetate 3-MH, while the control lost all the acetate 3-MH and more than half, like basically 76% of the 3-MH in only 3 months of aging. When we look at 6 months of aging, that's another trial where we are seeing here the control. We are looking in the graph at the loss of 4-MMP, 3-MH, and acetate 3-MH, and on the 3 thiolic, on the 2 thiols and the acetate, 6 months after fermentation, our control lost between 55 to 75% of its aromatic compounds, while the Aroma Protect in 6 months of aging lost only 20 to 30% of the thiolic compound. So huge impact. It's a product that you can add once at the end of fermentation, but also very interesting to add it when you do transfer or when you move the wine and you know you are gonna have some oxidation there. You want to protect your wine, you can add it at smaller dosage, 5 to 10 grams per hectoliter every time you move the wine. So great tool to protect and preserve your wine aromas. So as a conclusion of this presentation on thiolic compound, there is, of course, a big work to do in the vineyards, and it's gonna depend on your terroir, your climate, and your variety you're using. But there is a big thing now on talking about thiols on red wine too. It's gonna increase the freshness, it's gonna increase the red berry and the aromatic intensity of the wine, which goes very well in the trend of the market where consumers are looking for fresher and more fruitier wine in general. It's also, we all know the impact of thiols on whites and rosé, that is huge and associated with fresh and high quality wines, in fact. So to get them, once we work in the vineyard, we have to extract the precursors. All these compounds are under precursor form. We can do it through maceration, we can do it through the use of enzyme, we can do it through pressing and through stabilization of the grape lees. This will help extracting the enzyme crush is the enzyme that has a very strong impact without having the risk of oxidation and without having the too much phenolic compound extracted. Then you can boost and increase the content of thiols, level of thiol precursors in the wine to give more precursors to the yeast with using optithiol. It also will give you an antioxidant protection. The big step here is to express all these precursors now. And here you can work on temperature of fermentation, the yeast you are using, such as Excellence FTH or TXL, using an aroma, a yeast rehydrator, a yeast protector is a huge step, as we saw together. So ENOSTEAM is essential to really help the yeast having the best metabolism that she can. And then the use of enozyme thiol in fermentation or in aging or pre-bottling is a new product that really is a game changer in terms of aromatic compounds and thiols in wine. And the last point here is to protect or preserve all the aromas or the precursor, aromatic precursor, by controlling oxidation, being extremely careful with dissolved oxygen, being on the top of your sulfur addition. Also, the pressing step using an inert press such as Booker Inertis is huge. Fining has a big impact with pea protein, for example, the green fine must, and using Aroma Protect during aging also will really change your wine. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope